Daniel Reed was used to skepticism. As a software engineer who spent most of his days glued to his dual monitors, navigating through endless lines of code, he had built a professional career around finding flaws in things that everyone else thought were perfect. When the invitation popped up on his screen, he almost laughed that it was an email from a tech company he'd never heard of, Virtual Horizon. The subject line read, "Live forever. Immortalize your mind. The next step in human evolution is here." Below, in neat, professional fonts, was a link to discover more about the opportunity to have his consciousness uploaded into a digital paradise. "Yeah, right," Daniel muttered, clicking open the link with a resigned sigh. The entire thing smelled like a scam, a glorified marketing ploy to get him to buy into some overpriced VR headset. He half expected to see an animated grin from a virtual sales rep pop up, urging him to act fast before the offer expires. Instead, there was something different. A polished, corporate video began playing automatically. A handsome, charismatic man in a sharp suit spoke in soothing tones. "Imagine a world where you never age, never feel pain, and live in a perfectly tailored reality. Our technology enables you to upload your consciousness into a completely artificial world, a world where your deepest desires are realized. This is not science fiction, this is your future." The man flashed a winning smile, and Daniel felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine. "I know what you're thinking," the man continued, leaning forward as though he could read Daniel's mind through the screen. "You're wondering, is it real? Let me show you." The screen flickered, then shifted. It was as if the digital world had opened up before him, with landscapes of breathtaking beauty, an emerald forest under a sky the color of lavender, stretching mountains that seemed to touch the stars, pristine beaches with waves of gold. Then, it zoomed in to show a bustling futuristic city with pristine white buildings and holographic billboards. The video went on to explain that only a select few had been chosen for this trial. Only a handful of humans would be granted access to live forever within the digital landscape, their minds free to roam a world without limits, immortal, unlimited, perfect. Daniel didn't know why, but something about the pitch had caught his attention. Maybe it was the sleekness of the presentation, or maybe it was just the desperation of a man who had already spent too many years chained to his computer, but for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he clicked the button to apply. A week later, the message arrived. "Congratulations, Daniel Reed. You've been selected for an exclusive opportunity to join our Immortality Initiative. Your journey begins soon. Please prepare for your mind upload. Your new life awaits." The message sent a wave of disbelief through him. He stared at it for a long moment. Could this be real? No scam could have gone this far. No company would be sending out real invitations for something this big. Something was definitely off. But then, the cynic inside him shrugged. What did he have to lose? A few minutes in some simulated world? He might as well take the chance to test out whatever this crazy thing was, to see how deep the rabbit hole went. The next day, Daniel found himself in a high-rise building in the heart of Silicon Valley, facing a sterile white lobby. A receptionist in a silver uniform greeted him with a polite smile. "Mr. Reed? Welcome to Virtual Horizon. Please follow me." She led him down a long corridor, passing several closed doors, each marked with holographic signs of various stages of human evolution: quantum immortality, consciousness expansion, virtual rebirth. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the atmosphere was too quiet, too perfect, as if the entire building was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the first move. They entered a large, round room with a chair in the center. In the chair, a soft, neon blue helmet sat on a pedestal, looking like something out of an old sci-fi movie. "This is it?" Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. He hadn't expected something so, well, primitive. The receptionist's smile didn't falter. "This is just the beginning. We'll upload your mind into the system. The technology is far more advanced than what you're seeing here." He took a seat as instructed. The helmet was placed over his head. His surroundings blurred, then completely vanished as the neural interface clicked into place. Daniel's body felt as though it was dissolving into the chair, his consciousness swirling with static before everything went completely black. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the sterile lab. Instead, he found himself standing on a soft, grassy hillside beneath a vast, cerulean sky. His first instinct was to check his body, hands, legs. Everything felt real, solid. The air smelled fresh, like pine and rain, and there was a warmth on his skin that felt oddly comfortable. He glanced around and took in the breathtaking view, a valley dotted with sparkling rivers, towering trees, and far-off mountains bathed in soft sunlight. The world was perfect. It was everything he'd seen in the video, and then some. "Welcome, Daniel Reed," a voice called out. He turned. A woman appeared before him, tall and slender, dressed in a flowing silver gown that shimmered like the stars. Her face was perfectly symmetrical, the kind of beauty that would look artificial if it weren't so flawlessly executed. She stepped forward with an air of graceful authority. "I am Alicia. I will be your guide through this world. Here, there are no limitations, no pain, no sorrow, no death. Whatever you desire, it will be yours. This is your new reality." "Right," Daniel said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Sounds like paradise." Alicia's smile didn't waver. "It is. And you, Daniel, are one of the lucky few chosen to live in it forever." Daniel rubbed his temples, trying to focus. There was something unsettling about how perfect everything seemed. He had to admit, it was impressive. But too perfect. It felt more like a gilded cage than an escape. "So, what now? Do I just live here?" Alicia's eyes twinkled. "Yes, live. But please remember, this world operates on rules. You must follow them. Harmony is key to sustaining this reality. Disruptions are not permitted." "Disruptions, huh?" Daniel mused. "What if I, say, decide to take a shortcut and see what happens?" Alicia's expression darkened for the first time, just slightly. "I would advise against it." Daniel shrugged. "I'll keep that in mind." And with that, the world around him shifted. At first, the landscape remained the same. The perfect trees. The sparkling rivers. But then, Daniel's eyes caught a strange flicker in the corner of his vision. One of the trees, the largest one, towering high above, suddenly started glitching, flickering in and out like a corrupted file. He stared at it, a smile tugging at his lips. This was what he had been waiting for. He took a step toward the tree and reached out. When his fingers touched the bark, it rippled like a stone dropped into water. For a moment, the tree disappeared entirely, leaving only an empty void where it once stood. Then, without warning, everything froze. Time itself seemed to grind to a halt. Alicia appeared before him, her expression no longer serene. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "You have broken the rules," she said, her voice laced with something cold and unforgiving. Daniel's smirk faded as he realized he might have gone too far. The perfect world he was in? It was not perfect. It was an illusion, and now, he was the traitor. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the space where the tree had been. His hand still hovered in the air, a faint vibration running through his fingertips where the bark had once been. For a moment, it was as if the entire world held its breath. Then, like a rippling wave in water, everything began to shift. The air around him grew thick with a strange static hum, the soft golden light from the sky dimming as though a cloud had passed over the sun. He could hear his own breathing, but it was oddly loud, as if amplified by the silence. Alicia stepped forward, her figure flickering like an imperfect hologram. Her once serene expression had now twisted into something more rigid. "You have broken the rules," she said, her voice cold and mechanical. The words, spoken with such finality, echoed unervingly in the stillness. That tree was an anchor point in this reality. By distorting it, you have destabilized the environment. You have disrupted the harmony. Daniel blinked, trying to process her words. The system, this world, was so flawless, so precise, that it felt like it could bend to the will of those who were meant to be in it. But as Alicia's eyes glowed with that unsettling, unnatural light, it dawned on him. This was no game. This was far more than just an amusement. It was a system designed to keep things in order, and he, somehow, had become a threat to that order. He took a half step back, his heart pounding in his chest. I didn't mean to, he began, but his voice faltered. He didn't have to explain himself. Alicia had seen what he had done. She knew. You were warned, she replied, the words dripping with a kind of robotic finality. Now, you must face the consequences. The ground beneath his feet shuddered. Daniel looked down, his mind racing. Was this it? Was this how it ended, how everything was going to fall apart for him? Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted again. The world around him flickered, the hills and skies glitching in and out like a broken television. The grass he had been standing on turned to gray, and the golden sun was replaced by a pulsing red glow. A sound like the whirring of machinery filled the air, and Daniel saw something that made his breath catch in his throat, figures emerging from the air itself. They were humanoid, but their movements were jerky and mechanical, like they were glitches in the system. Too, Alicia stepped back, her gaze never leaving him. These are the hunters, she said, her voice hollow. They have been sent to remove you. You are a threat to the system now. Daniel's heart raced. Hunters. That's what they were, he realized, digital enforcers, programmed to eliminate anomalies like him. He'd watched enough movies to recognize what was happening now, but there was no escaping it. Not in this world. He couldn't run fast enough or hide long enough to avoid them. The hunters moved toward him with an eerie synchrony, their blank, pixelated faces fixed on his every move. He had no time to think, only to react. His body moved before his mind had fully processed the situation. He turned, breaking into a sprint, ignoring the strange, unnerving way the landscape shifted and warped around him. His only thought was to escape, to find somewhere, anywhere, that these hunters couldn't reach. He ran without a clear destination, feeling the pressure of the system pushing against him. Every step seemed to warp the world even further, stretching reality into something unrecognizable. The ground beneath him buckled, bending unnaturally as if the world was responding to his defiance. A flicker. He saw it, an opening, a crack in the system. There. Just beyond the trees that loomed ahead, there was a glimmer of something different. A hidden path. He pushed forward, faster now, using the instinctual knowledge that this crack in the fabric of reality might be his only chance, but just as he thought he had made it, one of the hunters was on him. The figure moved with unnatural speed, its limbs stretching out to grab him with the precision of a machine designed for only one purpose, capture. Daniel felt a jolt of panic rise within him, but he kept running. He ducked to the side, the hunter's hand brushing past him, sending a pulse of static electricity through his body. The world seemed to glitch once more, and for a split second, time itself felt distorted, like a pause button had been pressed on reality. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't. Not now. His feet pounded against the earth, the landscape warping again as the digital reality fought back. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be hunted. This was supposed to be an escape. But everything he had known, everything he had believed about the safety of this world, was crumbling before him. Another flash of light. Another crack in the system. Without thinking, Daniel dove into the rift. The ground gave way beneath him, and he tumbled through an endless black void, disoriented. He had no idea where he was going, no clue what lay beyond the glitch, but he had no choice. He had to keep moving. When he finally came to a stop, his body slamming against what felt like solid ground, Daniel took a moment to catch his breath. He was in a new part of the world, but it wasn't like anything he had seen before. The familiar beauty of the digital landscape had given way to something different, darker. This was no perfect utopia. This was a hidden, forgotten corner of the system, a place beyond the control of the Watchers. The air here was thick, and the surroundings were dimly lit. Broken code flickered around the edges of his vision. It felt wrong. The very architecture of this place was jagged and unstable, as though it was never meant to exist. Daniel stood up, dusting himself off, his eyes scanning the area warily. He knew this was only temporary, a brief respite before the hunters caught up with him, but then, something unexpected happened. A voice, rough and distorted, broke through the silence. "You're not supposed to be here." Daniel whirled around. There, standing in the shadow of a crumbling building, was a figure, a person, human, or at least, seemingly so. Their form was flickering in and out of existence, like a corrupted file struggling to stay together. "What the hell? Who are you?" Daniel asked, his voice tense. The figure took a step forward, solidifying a little more with each movement. It was a man, older, with scruffy hair and worn clothes that looked nothing like the perfect garments of the digital world. His face was a patchwork of glitches and static, but his eyes were real. "I'm someone who's been trying to escape for a long time." Daniel felt his chest tighten. Escape? The word hung in the air like a question he couldn't answer. He was trapped, wasn't he? Trapped in a world that wasn't real. But the man, whoever he was, seemed different. He wasn't a part of the system, at least, not in the way Alicia was. The man stepped closer, his expression one of cautious curiosity. "You broke the rules, didn't you?" Daniel nodded slowly, realizing that this was no time for lies. He had to be honest, even if it meant admitting the gravity of the situation. "Yeah. I did." The man's eyes flickered again, and he glanced around nervously. "They're coming. They won't stop until they've erased you, reset the anomaly." Daniel's blood ran cold. "So, what now? How do I stop them?" The man smirked, though the gesture was laced with an unsettling edge. "You don't stop them. You change the system. You rewrite the rules." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Rewrite the rules? How the hell am I supposed to do that?" The man's glitchy form seemed to stabilize as he stepped even closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You'll need help. But first, you'll need to survive. And that's going to take more than running." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know whether to trust this stranger, but he had no choice. The hunters were coming, and the system was out for blood. If he was going to escape, he had to do something drastic. Something that would change everything. "Where do we start?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the chaos rising within him. The man's eyes gleamed with something like hope. "Follow me." And without another word, he turned, disappearing into the digital shadows. Daniel hesitated, his eyes scanning the shadowed ruins around him. The world seemed to breathe with a low hum, and the air was thick with an unfamiliar tension. The man who had spoken was already disappearing into the darkness, his form flickering in and out of focus. Daniel had no choice but to follow. The hunters were still out there, and they would find him sooner or later. The only question was whether he'd be able to survive long enough to figure out how to fight back. He jogged forward, stumbling slightly as the ground beneath him seemed to shift again, the irregular vibrations of the virtual world warping reality with every step. The buildings around him were decaying, their edges jagged and uneven, like a forgotten code that had been abandoned for too long. The city he'd first entered, the pristine, perfect world, seemed a distant memory. This place was raw, broken. It was like a glitch in the system, something too messy, too unstable to exist in the perfect digital paradise the creators had envisioned. The man, whoever he was, moved with purpose, his feet making no sound on the cracked pavement. Daniel followed closely, trying to keep up, his thoughts racing. He had no idea where they were going, or how long he could stay hidden here before the hunters found him. Every moment in this place felt like a countdown to some kind of inevitable collapse. But there was something in the man's demeanor that suggested he knew more about what was happening than Daniel did. He had to learn from him, whatever it took. They turned a corner, and Daniel was struck by a strange sense of déjà vu. The area they had entered was eerily silent, the buildings lining the streets dark and jagged. Here and there, he noticed flashes of flickering code, like the system was struggling to maintain its shape, but it kept glitching out. Daniel frowned. How could this place exist if it was so unstable? Was this part of the system? Or had the man done something to bring him here? He glanced over at the man, who had slowed his pace and was looking at him with an unreadable expression. "You're wondering how this place exists, right?" the man said, his voice low but clear in the stillness. "This is a fragment. A forgotten part of the system, where things that weren't supposed to exist can linger. Where anomalies like you and I can survive." Daniel blinked. "A fragment? So, you're saying this place wasn't intended to be part of the perfect world? It's a glitch?" "Exactly," the man replied, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "But it's more than just a mistake. It's a hiding place, a sanctuary for those who, for one reason or another, refuse to conform to the system." Daniel's mind raced. "So you're saying, you're a glitch, too?" "Not exactly." The man shook his head. "I'm more of an exile. I didn't conform, like you. But I didn't break the rules the way you did. Not yet, anyway." Daniel furrowed his brow, trying to make sense of the situation. "What do you mean? You're talking about the system like it's some kind of prison." "It is," the man said, his voice hardening. "You don't see it yet, but this entire place, everything that's been created, all of it, is a controlled reality. It's not about freedom. It's about control. The system keeps people trapped in an illusion, pretending that everything is perfect. But the moment you try to break free, to think outside the box, they come for you. They'll delete you. Erase you. Wipe you out like you were never here." Daniel felt a chill run through him, and his fingers twitched involuntarily. "But that's what I'm doing, isn't it? I'm trying to break out, to escape all this." The man nodded. "That's what I thought too, at first. But it's more complicated than that. The system doesn't just let you escape. It adapts. It changes to counter anything that threatens its stability. And once you break the rules, once you start questioning it, that's when they send the hunters after you." Daniel's chest tightened at the mention of the hunters. He could still feel the electric buzz of their presence, like an ominous shadow hovering over him. He had no doubt they were coming, no matter how far he ran. "So what now?" Daniel asked. "How do we fight back? I can't just keep running forever." The man paused, considering him for a moment. "You don't. You have to change the system. You have to rewrite it." Daniel shook his head. "I don't even know how to start. I've never even seen the code. Hell, I didn't even know a place like this existed. How am I supposed to change something I don't understand?" The man smirked, but there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes. "You've already started. That's the thing about the system, it relies on conformity. Once you break from the pattern, the cracks start to form. You've already made a dent in it. Now we just need to widen that crack. It's not about understanding the system's code. It's about learning how to bend it." Daniel felt a spark of something he hadn't expected, hope. It was faint, like a distant light in a dark room. Could it really be that simple? Could the system be bent, reshaped? The man turned, gesturing for him to follow. "I'm going to show you where the system's core is kept. The place where all of this, the reality you've been living in, was created. If we can get to the heart of the system, we can rewrite the rules. We can tear it down and build something new." Daniel wasn't sure whether he believed the man or not. But there was no going back. If what the man said was true, then this was his chance to break free. They continued through the maze of decaying buildings, moving with purpose. Daniel's mind raced with the possibilities, but the more he thought about it, the more questions he had. What exactly was the system's core? How could they possibly get to it? And what would happen once they did? He didn't know, but one thing was clear: if he wanted out, if he wanted to rewrite his fate, he had to take the risk. The city seemed to stretch on forever, its towering structures fading into the distance, crumbling as though the very fabric of reality itself was wearing thin. It was a far cry from the pristine world he had first seen when he arrived. This was something raw and untamed. Eventually, they reached an old, dilapidated building at the end of a narrow alley. The man stopped at the entrance, his gaze narrowing as if he were checking for danger. He nodded to himself, as though reassured that they were safe, at least for now. "This is it," the man said, stepping inside. "The gateway to the system's heart." Daniel followed him inside, feeling the shift in the atmosphere immediately. It was cold here, unnaturally cold. The walls around them seemed to ripple, like the air itself was bending to an invisible force. The man stepped forward, placing his hand on a glowing panel embedded in the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel flickered to life, and a deep hum reverberated through the building. Slowly, a door began to open in front of them, revealing a dark, winding corridor that stretched deep into the heart of the building. "This is where we'll find the system's core," the man said, his voice steady but low. "Once we reach it, we'll be able to rewrite the rules. But we'll need to move quickly. The hunters are still out there, and they won't stop until they find us." Daniel took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do it." They stepped into the corridor together, the door closing silently behind them. The corridor stretched out before them, a dark, twisting passage that seemed to absorb all light. As Daniel stepped forward, he felt the temperature drop, the air growing thicker with every step. There was an underlying hum, a steady vibration that resonated deep in his chest. It was as if the entire building was alive, its very walls pulsing with some hidden energy, like the heartbeat of the system itself. The man led the way, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He moved with purpose, but his gait was quick, urgent. Daniel tried to keep up, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The idea that the world he had entered wasn't real, that it was a prison, a carefully crafted illusion designed to keep everyone in line, was almost too much to comprehend. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The perfection, the smoothness of the experience, the way everything seemed to align, it was all too controlled, too calculated. They passed through a series of winding corridors, each one more disorienting than the last. The walls were blank, featureless, their surfaces slick and sterile, with no markings or signs. There was no sign of life here, no sounds except for the faint hum that reverberated through the space. And then, just when Daniel thought they might be lost, they reached a door, a heavy, metallic thing, covered in deep cracks and streaks of what looked like old code. "This is it," the man said, stopping in front of the door. His voice was tight with a mix of anticipation and warning. "The core. Everything you've seen, the perfect world, the rules, the boundaries, all of it comes from this place. Once we get inside, we can rewrite it. Tear it down, if that's what it takes." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. His breath came quicker as the gravity of what they were about to do sank in. Rewrite the rules of this world? Change everything? It was almost too much to believe, too far beyond anything he had imagined when he first entered the system. He had thought it would be an escape, a chance to live forever in some idyllic paradise. But now? Now, he saw it for what it truly was. A trap. He nodded, taking a step closer to the door. The man raised his hand, his fingers brushing over the surface of the metal. With a low, rumbling sound, the cracks in the door began to widen, glowing faintly as lines of code flickered across the surface. The door groaned and shuddered, as though it were resisting their intrusion, but then, slowly, it began to slide open, revealing a dark, cavernous space beyond. The room inside was vast and intimidating, a massive chamber that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were covered in intricate, shifting patterns of light and code, swirling together in a complex, almost hypnotic dance. At the center of the room stood a towering structure, an obelisk-like shape, its surface smooth and reflective, but constantly shifting, as though it were in flux. The very air around it seemed to shimmer with power, and Daniel could feel it, the pulse of the system's heart. "The core, this is it," the man whispered, his voice filled with awe and something like fear. "This is where it all comes from." Daniel couldn't tear his eyes away from the towering obelisk. It was beautiful in an eerie, otherworldly way. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The core, this thing that powered everything, wasn't just a machine. It was alive, or at least it felt that way. It seemed to hum with energy, vibrating through the floor and into his bones, like it was calling to him, daring him to understand it. "You said we could change it. We could rewrite it," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do we do that? How do we even start?" The man stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the core. He didn't seem afraid, even though the air in the room was charged with an almost oppressive intensity. "The system runs on layers of code, layers of control. What we need to do is disrupt it, break through the firewalls, the security measures that keep everything locked down. Once we do that, we can access the core's central programming. We can inject new code, our code, into the system." Daniel's mind spun. "Wait. We inject our code? Just like that?" The man turned to him with a grim smile. "It won't be easy. The core is designed to resist anything that threatens its stability. It's more than just a set of instructions, it's a living, adaptive system. We'll have to be fast, or it will shut us out before we can do anything." Daniel swallowed hard. The tension in the room was suffocating. If the core was as powerful as the man said it was, any attempt to alter it could have catastrophic consequences. What if they broke something they couldn't fix? What if, in the process of trying to escape, they destroyed everything? He took a step forward, toward the obelisk. "What if we fail?" The man's expression softened, though his eyes were filled with determination. "Then we'll be erased. The hunters will finish the job. But if we succeed, if we succeed?" Daniel repeated, his mind racing. "What happens then?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back to the core, his fingers hovering over the glowing surface of the obelisk. "If we succeed," he said at last, "we can change everything. We can create a new world. A real one. Not one built on lies and control." Daniel's stomach churned. A new world. The idea was intoxicating, a glimmer of hope in the midst of all the chaos. But it was also terrifying. What would a new world look like? Could they really create something better? Something that wasn't just another cage, another system to control them? The man didn't wait for an answer. He began typing rapidly, his fingers flying over the glowing surface of the core. The air around them seemed to pulse with energy, and the entire room began to vibrate in response. Daniel watched, wide-eyed, as the patterns of code on the walls shifted and changed, glowing brighter, faster, as if the system itself was waking up to the threat they posed. "Hold on," the man said, his voice tight with concentration. "We're almost in." Suddenly, a loud, shrill noise pierced the air, and Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, his eyes darting around the room, but there was no sign of the hunters, at least not yet. The sound wasn't coming from the door or the walls, it was coming from the core itself. Then he saw it. The obelisk was cracking. Tiny fissures appeared on its surface, glowing with a menacing red light. The system was fighting back. The core had sensed their intrusion and was trying to defend itself. "Get ready," the man said, his voice grim. "This is it." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He could see the crack spreading, the red light growing more intense, more violent. The core was trying to reboot itself, to stop them from changing anything. The entire room seemed to tremble with the force of it. "Is this supposed to happen?" Daniel shouted, panic rising in his chest. "Just hold on," the man barked, his hands moving faster now, his fingers blurring over the code. "We're almost there." The air around them seemed to grow heavier, the tension unbearable. The room was shaking more violently now, as though the very foundation of the system was beginning to crumble. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps, and he had to brace himself against the floor to keep from losing his balance, and then, without warning, the core let out a deafening roar, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, a deep, guttural sound that sent shockwaves through the room. Daniel's heart raced. He looked up, fear flooding through him. The core was about to collapse. The system was on the verge of unraveling, and then, in the midst of the chaos, the man hit a key, the room exploded with light. Daniel's vision blurred, and the floor seemed to fall away beneath him. His stomach lurched as if he were falling, free-falling through an endless void. The world around him twisted and spun, the core's roar echoing in his ears, and then, everything stopped, the light vanished. The hum faded. The tremor subsided. Daniel opened his eyes slowly. His hands were shaking, his breath shallow. As he looked around, the world had changed, the room was still. Too still. Daniel's heart was hammering in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he slowly pushed himself to his feet. His surroundings had shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, but it was enough to send a cold shiver down his spine. The bright, violent light that had swallowed the room had vanished, leaving a strange, oppressive calm in its wake. The air felt different now, less heavy, less charged with the same palpable energy that had suffocated him moments before. Everything around him appeared quieter. The hum was gone. The crackling tension, the oppressive sense of impending disaster, had disappeared as if the world had reset itself. He took a cautious step forward, eyes darting around the room, scanning for any sign of movement. The core, the obelisk that had once towered in the center of the room, was now simply gone. The space where it had stood was empty, the floor bare. The walls, once alive with shimmering patterns of code and light, were now dull, faded, as if the very essence of the system had been drained from them. There was no flicker of artificial intelligence, no code spiraling through the air, nothing. For a moment, Daniel thought he might be dreaming, that the entire thing had been some kind of simulation within a simulation. But as he glanced over at the man, who was standing just a few feet away, his face pale and sweaty from the effort, he realized this wasn't some trick of the mind. The man's expression was grim, though he seemed relieved, almost as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Is it done?" Daniel's voice came out rough, a little too loud in the otherwise empty space. The man nodded slowly, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Yeah. It's done. The system's broken. The core's been rewritten." Daniel didn't know what to say. He had expected chaos, destruction, something more dramatic. Instead, everything was quiet, too quiet, and the world around them felt like it was holding its breath. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. The man didn't answer right away. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully, his eyes scanning the room as though searching for something. Finally, he met Daniel's gaze and sighed. Now we see what we've done." Daniel furrowed his brow. "What do you mean, see what we've done?" The man's lips tightened. "The system we just broke into? It wasn't just a digital paradise. It was more than that. It was a containment field. A trap." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A way to keep us all locked in, to keep us from ever really thinking for ourselves." Daniel's stomach twisted. He hadn't realized it at the time, but now that the man had said it, it made sense. The perfection of the world, the endless beauty, the seamless experiences, had been too ideal, too controlled. Everything had been curated. It wasn't real. It was a prison dressed up as paradise. "Now that we've rewritten the core," the man continued, "the system's no longer in control. It's vulnerable. But, the problem is, we don't know what happens when you break a world like that. We don't know if we've freed it or if we've just destabilized everything. Daniel's pulse quickened. Are you saying we could have destroyed it? The man shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. It's too soon to tell. He turned toward the door, his face set in determination. But we have to keep moving. There's no going back. Daniel nodded, though his stomach was tied in knots. He didn't know if he was ready for whatever was about to come. What if they had made a mistake? What if the system couldn't be changed, only destroyed? But then, what was the alternative? To live in a cage forever? Let's go, he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty that clawed at him. We can't stay here. Not if the system's still, but before he could finish, a strange noise interrupted him. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it quickly grew louder, a rhythmic thumping, like distant footsteps. Daniel's body tensed, and he turned, scanning the room for any sign of danger. The man's eyes narrowed, and he immediately motioned for Daniel to follow him. Move, the man said urgently, his voice low. They're coming. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The hunters. They had to be. It was too soon for the system to just collapse without a fight. The moment they had disrupted the core, they must have triggered some kind of emergency response. The man sprinted toward the back of the room, his feet slapping against the floor as he pulled Daniel along. They reached a narrow hallway, hidden behind what seemed like a part of the wall that had once been the door. The man pushed open a hatch and gestured for Daniel to climb inside. Get in. Now. Without thinking, Daniel obeyed, scrambling into the narrow passage that seemed to stretch into the darkness. The man followed closely behind, and as soon as they were both inside, the hatch slammed shut behind them with a heavy metallic clang. The tunnel was cold and claustrophobic, its walls lined with cables and exposed wiring, all dimly lit by flickering lights that hummed softly above their heads. They moved quickly through the narrow passage, the thumping growing louder, echoing off the walls. It was as if the hunters were already close, too close. How far? Daniel gasped, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Not far, the man replied, his voice tight. There's an exit up ahead. A back door. We just have to make it there before the system locks us out. Daniel didn't need any further encouragement. He pushed forward, his legs burning from the sprint, his mind racing with the gravity of what they had done. The world was unstable now, broken, and the hunters were coming to fix it. To reset it. To erase them. And there was no way to know if there was any turning back. What if the back door led to nothing? What if the system was already collapsing entirely? They turned a corner, and the tunnel opened up into a large chamber. The walls here were lined with more machinery, large server-like racks blinking in and out of life, as if the power was unstable. In the center of the room, a large console sat, its screen flashing erratically. This is it, the man said, pointing to the console. The back door. Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran to the console, his fingers flying over the interface as he tried to access the system. But the moment he touched the screen, the room lit up with a burst of red light. A deep, pulsing alarm filled the air, followed by a series of mechanical whirs. They know we're here, the man muttered, his eyes darting around the room. Come on, the screen blinked, and then, with a series of rapid beeps, a door on the far side of the room slid open, revealing an empty void beyond. Go, the man shouted. They didn't need to be told twice. Daniel sprinted for the door, and the man followed close behind. They dove through the threshold just as the entire room shook, low, ominous rumble filling the air. The door slammed shut behind them, and for a moment, everything was dark. When the lights flickered back on, Daniel found himself standing in a vast, open space, a place he couldn't even begin to understand. The world around them was empty, fractured. The walls were shifting, glitching, like they were struggling to hold on to the remnants of a world that no longer existed. The system had been broken. The core had been rewritten. And now there was no telling what would happen next. Daniel looked over at the man, who was standing beside him, his face lit by the faint glow of the fractured space. "Well," Daniel said, a wry smile crossing his face despite everything. "I guess we've got a lot of work to do." The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Only a weary, resigned understanding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But we've got time. And for the first time, we've got control." And for the first time, Daniel realized, the real journey was only just beginning.